Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Industry Insights. I'm your host, Leah Troscianecki, and I am joined today by two of our very own experts, Aaron and Brad. Guys, thank you so much for joining me. I'd love to start the show off just by having you guys introduce yourselves because you have popped up on the occasional Industry Insights and Tech Bites shows, but I think it'll be really good to orient everyone to the kind of expertise that we have on staff here at Veeam. So, Aaron, why don't I start with you and you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Leah. Aaron Murphy, I'm the field CTO for the Americas. I'm speaking to you today from New Jersey. Those who've figured it out realize that I'm originally from the UK, and I've been working in helping companies recover since 1993, so I aged myself.
That's all right. Age is just experience and some extra seasoning. But speaking of experience, I am super excited to have Brad join us as well. Brad is a longtime Veeamer. Brad, go ahead and introduce yourself, even though hopefully a good amount of the audience already knows you.
Yeah, thanks, Leah. I'll say, Aaron, I think your accent's getting more American by the day, though. So it's harder to tell. But it's appreciate you having me, Brad Linch, Director of Technical Strategy on the product strategy team here. Like you said, been here for 7 years, been in the field as an SE, managed an SE team here at Veeam, and now over here on the strategy team. So a lot of different roles here. So excited for the conversation today.
Absolutely, me too. And something that I'm really excited that you guys are bringing to the table is a lot of this awesome field and in-seat experience, because it's very easy for, thought leadership content pieces like this to feel a little ivory tower and lacking some of that real world support. So I'm really excited that you guys are joining us today because I think you're going to bring a lot of that expertise and hands-on work into this conversation today. And it's going to bounce around to a lot of different topics because we are, of course, in the middle of our cyber incident response series. And specifically, we wanted to kind of take a break from this sort of step-by-step life cycle that we've been going through and talk a bit about the various technology integrations that we have available in the Veeam ecosystem, because something that Veeam is very passionate about is a partner-first approach to how we go to market. So really thinking critically about how Veeam can do the due diligence to build integrations that are out of the box or exposed, and make it possible for any kind of organization, regardless of their needs, to build the architecture and the connections that they need to get the most value out of their investments. So that's something we're super passionate about, but that means that there can be a bit of a tyranny of choice. So we are here to cut through some of the noise and hopefully give you all in the audience some interesting things to go chase down and think about as you're looking at your Veeam installations. But first, let's just kind of reorient to what we're doing here in this series. So if we go ahead and put up that slide there, that is beautiful. We are, as I said, in the middle of our cyber incident response series. Veeam purchased a company called Coveware a few months ago. And on the last two shows, I had the field CISO for Coveware join me to talk a bit about incident response, because of course, there are lots of different use cases for backup and recovery, but what's becoming a really hot button topic for so many of you all is cyber incident response, especially when it comes to ransomware and other kinds of malicious attacks. So we're trying to go step by step. How do you prepare? How do you think about detection and analysis? In future episodes, we're also going to talk about containment and eradication. And actually, Brad is going to be joined by Jason Buffington. He's going to be sitting in the host chair for that next show. And then we are also going to talk about recovery and how you handle that post-incident period. So lots of really great content coming down the pipe. If you haven't had a chance to take a look at the first two episodes, I recommend that you watch that from whatever platform you like, whether that's X, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn. We are on all of them, and you can check out those recordings on any of those platforms. Speaking of platforms, we want to hear from you all where you guys are calling in from. One of the great things about our series here is that this is very much a community-driven show, and we really like to know where everybody is tuning in from, because this is not an American problem, this is not a Brit problem, this is an everyone problem, that we need to be dealing with these kinds of bad actors in incident response. So if you can put in the chat in whatever platform you're tuning in from, where you're dialing in from, we'll put up a map in a little bit and light that map up so you can see where the Veeam community is calling in from. But before we get to that, let's talk a bit about, how we might approach the various technology integrations that we have. And to do that, I think it makes sense to talk about this idea of compounding failures, because unfortunately, if you spend any time with security teams, they'll tell you that they live their life on a swivel, right? They're constantly thinking about where that next threat actor is coming from. And on the last shows, Ray and I talked a bit about some of these threat attacks. And one of the interesting things we highlighted is how common some of the tactics still are. They may dress a little different. They may call themselves something different, especially as you see some of these bad actor groups dissolve and form new groups like Black Hat dissolving and coming into some of these other groups. But you're still going to see a lot of the same tried and true tactics that they take. So if you want to learn more about those TTPs, those tactics, techniques, and processes or procedures, check out the previous show. But this gives you a good eye chart of all of the different compounding failures that could go into this process. And I know, Aaron, this is a slide that you use a lot, because I know one of the things that we talked about in preparing the show was you spending a lot of time out in the field doing these sort of resiliency workshops. So talking to different IT teams and security teams about their incident response plans. So what kind of conversation comes up when you talk about this kill chain?
Thanks, Leah. Well, when I first saw this slide, I actually came over with Ray, who's been on the show from Coveware by Veeam. And he's talking here about all the things that need to go wrong, the compounding failures for that to end, unfortunately, in a cyber attack, or at least a ransom. The last thing there that might help you avoid paying the ransom is making sure you have good backups and the ability to recover them cleanly. But immediately I saw this and I just flipped it on its head, and I see it as the opportunity, all the opportunities that you have with the right tactics and capabilities to stop a threat actor. So we know from phishing or from the rise of kind of attacks where they're pretending to be a help desk that they're going to get in at that first point, but that's not the end of the world, right? You've got all these other things that can be going on. I mean, do you control the applications that every user has on their system? Do you stop them installing things that might make their life easier but might be used against them? Do you allow command execution? Do you have behavioral EDR, making sure that people are behaving how they normally behave? Multi-factor authentication. These are all great tactics to stop the threat actor early. And then, things like, I'll just pick on a couple, like network segmentation. So even if this account is compromised, it's contained and it hasn't spread throughout the whole environment. Essentially, when there are compounding failures that lead to an attack or a ransom note, all these things have to fail, and it doesn't have to be that way. And that's why I love talking about it, because it's just customers can kind of self-certify and realize where their gaps are and what they need to do.
Absolutely. I think a lot of this is about really analyzing how do you get back to some of those basics and build some of these practices, and ultimately talk about that as a community too, and share some of those best practices. Brad, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, great points all around. And I think what this slide really highlights, right, is that, what this series is about. 64% of organizations say they're misaligned between their security teams and their backup teams, which is so unfortunate, because ultimately, if these compounding series of failures go wrong and you're in a situation where you're having the worst day of your life, and now you have to rely on your backups to avoid paying the ransom and leverage it for recoveries, well, having that misalignment between security and backup is going to make your job so much tougher. It's critical that these security teams are aware of, hey, what exactly is going on with the backups? Do we have an immutable backup? Have we tested those backups? What are the RPOs and RTOs associated with all the different workloads we have? Have we done data classification and business impact assessments and things of that nature, right? So all of those different things could be a whole episode within themselves, but it's just so critical that you don't want the security team to get to this, last step in the kill chain and have no idea, what their backups look like at that point.
Absolutely, especially since I think, Brad, you shared an example of, how this could play out in the real world. And it just is so common. I feel like this example could be repeated a bunch of different times. Do you want to explain this example a little bit?
Yeah, well, this data is so interesting, right? So this is actually from Coveware, the incident response firm that we acquired that you mentioned earlier, Leah, right? So these are folks that are boots on the ground experience. They get involved when a ransomware attack hits, and these are the people you hire to help negotiate with the threat actors, to help do forensics, digital forensics, to understand, what was the scope of the attack, what accounts got compromised, how did they move laterally, things of that nature. And what you're looking at right here is what the threat actor actually shared with the client. So, this might be a part of the negotiation. Like, hey, we're not going to budge here unless you can actually tell us how you got into our environment. 'Cause sometimes the logs don't tell you, right? Sometimes it's easy. You can tell they RDP'd in. You can tell an account was compromised and got around MFA or whatever it might be. But sometimes, you're not able to figure that out. And what's so interesting about this is this is the threat actor telling you, hey, you have a SIEM tool, but nobody pays attention to it. You guys have become numb to all the false positives, and nobody's paying attention to the alerts that were getting sent to you. You have easy passwords. You have password 123. It's so easy for these attackers to run a script. They can run a script that goes through, my username, brad.lynch, and runs through a script of the top 10 million most common used passwords, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, PASSWORD, right? And that script will run in minutes. And if I'm using a common password, now they have access to my account. So it's so critical that we're using complex passwords. And us at Veeam, we know that, right? We now have to do 16-character passwords, and they rotate all the time. So it can come, the cost of that can be a little cumbersome to your end users, but it's much better than having to deal with the worst day of your life.
And we're going to talk a lot about this balance, right, between speed, right? Brad mentioned that, sometimes you kind of know right away how they got in or where they got in. Oftentimes it's compounding, as we said, and sometimes you don't. But you do have this concept of racing against the clock. And so when it comes to the preparation and figuring out your architecture, it is this balance between speed and complexity and considering social engineering and all of these factors. So again, hopefully we're going to give you guys some nice things to chew on. Before we get to that, I do want to go ahead and put up our map, though, because a lot of you guys wrote in to let us know where you were calling in from. And per usual, we're getting to light up the map a whole bunch. I did want to give a special shout out to Patrick and Diego. You guys have joined us for the last couple of episodes and keep commenting. So we really appreciate you guys joining us. Here in the United States, a bunch of us from production and on the show are calling in today. As Aaron said, he's calling in from New Jersey. I was in Colorado last week. Brad is in Colorado this week. I'm back home in Ohio. We also have production in Texas. And we have a couple of folks joining us from those various places, including a viewer from Dallas, Texas, as well as a few folks from California. So thank you guys so much for joining us. Over in Europe, Aaron, you're not alone. We have someone joining us from the UK, and we also have a couple of folks joining us from Italy as well. So if we go ahead and flip over again, we have Brazil per usual, but we also have someone joining us from Bolivia. So thank you so much. I haven't lit up that country in a while on the map, so it's exciting. And then over in Africa, we have South Africa, which you guys are always really great viewers, as well as Egypt. And I think we've had Egypt a couple shows in a row too, so that's super exciting. Let us know again in the chat if you haven't had a chance to let us know. We'll light up that map again later on in the show. But with that, let's get back into it and talk a bit about complexity, because this is an eye chart. We as a Veeam team, of course, have a long history of building strong alliance relationships. Back in the day, it was all about storage partnerships, breaking into cloud. We now have these incredible relationships with Microsoft and AWS and Google and IBM. But breaking into security and really thinking about the various use cases, it's creating quite a complex prism for us to think about all of the different ways that someone may want to integrate their Veeam stack into their security stack. So we wanted to try to show you the breadth, and then we'll spotlight and break down a couple of these pieces. And Aaron, I want to bring you in on this because I know when we were talking about this in the pre-show, one of the things you were really excited about is this idea of choice, this idea that whether you're looking to cut costs, especially if you're an SMB, every penny counts. Whether you're looking for, again, reducing some of that complexity and cutting through all the different signals and getting some of that signal fatigue, there's kind of something in it for everyone. So do you want to talk a little bit about why this idea of choice is so exciting?
Sure. Well, there's a couple of things, Leah, and you said complexity, and that's because there's a lot of things going on this slide. But you're trying to make a decision what's best for your organization, and you've probably invested in a few technologies, you've learned how to use them, you've got comfortable with them. Well, the worst thing to happen is, if I make this choice, I have to change something else because it doesn't work together. What's much easier is if, and it works with my other products of choice. So all of a sudden you've got a streamlined entry into a system where you're using storage that you're familiar with, you're integrating with things like ServiceNow, for your help desk, you've got integrating with your security tools, your antivirus, and you've got all that choice to put all the things that you've already invested your time and effort into. So that's one angle. The other angle, Brad mentioned, going and doing business impact analysis and working out what your critical systems were and what business expectations were in terms of recovery. And if you have to change that, suddenly choice becomes super powerful because you can choose storage that will work at the performance for recovery that you need for that workload. And often actually changing storage can lead to things like saving money. You've got a fixed security budget. Maybe it's not linked to the infrastructure and storage budget, but what you can do is often save money in one place by making the right choice, getting the performance that you need, but lowering costs and having some money left over to spend on something else that you maybe didn't think you could afford in this budget cycle. So I think there's a lot more going on than just the technology, and there's lots of data points we can talk about, and we will in terms of technical integrations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this idea of balancing costs as a technical requirement is something that we talk a lot about as a Veeam team, right? I spend a lot of time in the cloud space. Brad does as well, actually. And one of the things that is becoming really popular to talk about is cloud FinOps, right? This idea that the way you architect something can dramatically change how much you're spending on something. So when you're staring down the barrel of flat budgets year over year or needing to find money somewhere, there may be money to be found in the couch cushions, if you will, right? Just taking a look and cleaning up a little bit can do a lot of good. And that actually is a really great transition, I think, Brad, to talk a bit about some of the spotlights we wanted to do on some of these ecosystem plays, because when we think of Veeam's heritage, as I said, the first set of alliance partnerships we really focused on were storage integrations. And you may think that that doesn't have a lot to do with security, but I think we think it has a lot to do with security, especially because we talked a lot about speed, this ticking clock. So for you guys who are hardcore in the backup community on this call, you know all too well how important some of those storage integrations are. But Brad, let's just catch everybody else up on the call who may be thinking, how is storage integrations and security related?
Yeah, absolutely, Leah, right? And that previous slide is just so important because it highlights that you get performance and at an economical solution without sacrificing security, right? You don't have to sacrifice security with Veeam to still get a performance economical solution, which then leads into this, right? When we go to that compounding series of kill chain slides, this gets into the storage integration. So ultimately, you're at the point of a cyber incident where you have to recover. Well, all you really care about that point is you need to recover as fast as humanly possible. All the detection tools that you have, those aren't going to help you now at this point, unfortunately. Now, certainly you'll do things in lessons learned to improve that and do some forensics to figure out how you can do better next time. But now you're in a situation where you want to recover as fast as possible. And it's interesting because Gartner actually wrote a report on how to actually have a positive outcome in a cyber recovery. And they talked about how you have to have layers of recovery. You can't just recover from backup and expect to have an RTO that's going to meet the business. And we talk a lot about how ransomware is the worst type of disaster. And that sounds like kind of just like a sexy catchphrase, but it's so much more than that, right? If you've tested your DR, well, that's not the same as testing a CR, a cyber recovery, right? Because at the end of the day with a DR, what are you doing? You're able to really take your latest restore point and you're able to restore it directly into production. Neither of those things are true in a cyber recovery, which significantly affect the RTO. You don't know if you can use your latest restore point, and you really shouldn't restore directly back into production. You should really test it, do additional scans. Unfortunately, our survey data shows people try to restore directly into production. It doesn't usually go very well. But that's where that storage integration piece comes in, right? Because with Veeam, you can restore from backups, you can restore from storage snapshots, so many different storage integrations we have, and you can restore for replicas. And when we talk about replicas, we're talking about hypervisor replicas, both for VMware and Hyper-V. And to have those 3 layers of recovery in an incident, I don't think I've seen it be so helpful for customers during incidents.
Yeah. And I think something that, when you're playing that game of speed, that is an interesting development, if you will, in the storage space is thinking about immutable storage. So if we're not confident that you can restore something and you think you need to test it and scan it, et cetera, how do you maybe take that component out of it when you're thinking about speed? So something like immutable storage can be a really great architectural component. And we know from talking with our community, we know from survey data that immutable storage is absolutely being adopted pretty big in the Veeam community. And this is, again, where that beauty of freedom of choice comes in, because we have so many amazing ecosystem partners. That said, I do want to highlight kind of an interesting development from the Veeam team. We earlier this year announced a new solution called Veeam Vault, which is our own proprietary immutable storage component. We're actually going to be releasing a new version of it coming soon that will be more integrated than ever before. So stay tuned to the Veeam team for updates on that front, especially if you just like to keep things simple and you don't want to be cutting through all the noise of choice. Adding that easy button of Veeam Vault may be exactly what your organization needs. Something that isn't easy, and Hani actually mentioned on LinkedIn, it's really important to use complex passwords. Password management, I don't think, is going to get simpler. And so I think it's good to kind of highlight that Veeam has some really great integrations with various encryption and key management systems that you can see here. Brad, I know something that we talked about in the pre-show as well is that that's going to be an area that Veeam keeps looking to in the future of how do we think about innovation in the password space. Do you want to add a little bit of color to that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point by Hani, right? So today, of course, we have several different KMS integrations, so you can leverage your own encryption keys instead of using ones created by Veeam. So that's totally up to the user. But also, we're adding this. There'll almost be like a 4th pillar here for PAMs, right? So for password management. So in the next in version 13, I should say, because there'll be a 12.3 release in December before version 13. But we'll have integrations with vendors like CyberArk, where you'll be able to do password rotation and other, definitely looking to add more PAM services as well. But this is going to be so helpful for folks who, the backups at the end of the day, they have the keys to the kingdom, kind of. They have access to VMware, storage, databases, things of that nature. So it's so important to keep your credentials to your backup server as locked down as possible, and integrating with these PAM services like CyberArk plays a major role in that.
Really exciting. So again, I think you'll see Veeam's commitment to innovation is just going to keep coming. So you've got to stay tuned to the Veeam team to hear about some of those enhancements. And if you want to be kind of in that early access, let us know, let your Veeam rep know, because I think it just takes a village for us to continue to keep up with the ever-changing tactics of these bad actors. Speaking of which, I think what's going to be kind of different for your general Veeam community is this next piece, which is all the different ways that we are thinking about detection and analysis. Brad mentioned earlier in that example, hey, looks like you guys are not really paying attention to the signals coming in your SIEM tool. That's a really great transition for us to mention that we have some really great partnerships that we've been building with Sophos, which was our introductory partner for SIEM, Splunk, and then we also recently announced a partnership with Palo Alto, which is very exciting. But Aaron, I want to bring you in on this because this goes back to our game of acronym roulette, where every day it feels like we've got new acronyms in our rotation. So do you want to talk to us a little bit about SIEM, SOAR, right? Some of these different ecosystem plays that we now have.
Yeah, certainly. I think, when we look at organizations and when they have to do recovery, or they have to consider paying a ransom, what tends to have broken down is the people and process, and that can be solved a little bit with the right technology integration. So, integrations have always been possible, but often through coding, through APIs, things that not everybody is particularly skillful in. It's not, I find it not particularly difficult, so I maybe come from a different space, but if you can get an out-of-the-box integration with something like ServiceNow, so that you're covering everything. If you can get an out-of-the-box app with Splunk and with Palo Alto, where the right messages, signals that something might be happening that you want to actually respond to, and you can actually respond with things like, oh, I've got signs of a early threat, possibly a bad actor is on my system and maybe going to launch an encryption attack in the very near future. If I as the security team can from that initiate an instant snap, take a latest copy of the data, so I've got the latest copy before an encryption attack occurs, then I'm in a much better position. And that whole integration of having meaningful messages from the backup software and from the security software flowing between those teams will encourage them to get together and do things in a more streamlined way. So personally, I've always focused in on people and processes. Brad's done a few of these incident response tabletops with me where I talk a lot about having an asset register, having a CMDB, knowing the full workflow of all your applications and all the systems involved. Well, that's a lot easier when you have integrations out of the box.
It definitely does. And I think that's going to be part of the work that Veeam continues to do, is recognizing how those out of the box elements are so crucial. Again, especially as we've been balancing speed and complexity and all that jazz. But Brad, I think this is a good time to talk a bit about some of the innovations on the Veeam side. So as I mentioned last week, we had Ray Ummerly from the Coveware by Veeam team to talk a bit about detection. And in particular, something that we didn't have a chance to really highlight was one of their tools that they have, which is called Recon. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what Recon does?
Yeah, super excited for this kind of first iteration of integrating Coveware's technology with Veeam's technology, right? So Recon today with Coveware is when they're involved in an incident, this is a tool they use for forensic analysis to help do kind of what we were talking about earlier, do that digital forensics to look for what accounts were compromised, what IPs were moving laterally, things of that nature, and map it to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Well, we're really taking that tool and applying it to Veeam, in that we know, right, the data shows from our ransomware survey trends report that over 90% of the time, these attackers are going to at least attempt to log into the backup server and compromise your backups. Now, it's not always going to work, but the forensics will show that they're at least going to try to log in and compromise your backups, because that makes their threats that much greater. If they can say, hey, we've encrypted all your data, all your backups are gone, now what are you going to do? But what this does is it's going to proactively scan your backup server to look for that suspicious type of behavior. Hey, is Aaron trying to log into my backup server and he typically doesn't? Is he trying to brute force his attack in? Is an external IP that doesn't usually remote access my Veeam console trying to get into my server? That's super suspicious. So it's looking for data like that, so then you can take action and beforehand know, hey, this account's been compromised. We need to take action. And I kind of use this idea in conjunction with a honeypot server. So set this up with a Veeam honeypot decoy server. And if you see any type of activity go on, that's a critical alert and should be taken very seriously.
I love that honeypot approach, certainly. And Aaron, I didn't realize you were a bad actor in this equation, but now I think we're going to make you our official villain. Villains are usually British, right? So that totally checks.
Always, we're so sneaky.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of being sneaky, I do want to mention before we move on from this, another really great function of Veeam directly. One of our features is called the Incident Response API. So Aaron, why don't you tell us a little bit about that API?
Well, what I love about this layer is, we can then outsource a lot of the detection to all the different variety of capabilities out there, whether it's host-based detection, endpoint detection. There's more players in the game that can help you, find that something bad could be going on in your environment. So we've got all the great technology we have in Veeam, but now we're saying, hey, let's take that API feed from the security tools that people have invested in, that may be using millions of lines of of data to build an AI model to do the detection, and they can flag it to us. So we get that flagged in our console that these workloads possibly got signs of compromise with this kind of threat actor at this time, and that now we should get on the front foot and start looking at the restore points that we have and making sure using our threat hunting tools that they haven't got indicators of compromise or threat actor permanence within those restore points. So you're really getting ahead of the game. That might be something that if you did have an attack, you'd be doing, a few days later. Well, now you can get on the front foot. So you're going to be in a much better position, and that's going to bring the whole recovery time down significantly.
Really exciting. Again, that balance of trying to get ahead of the clock. I think that's an area where we really want folks to be looking at. So let us know. I recommend that you go to community.veeam.com to learn more about that incident API, because we would really love to see more people using it, giving us feedback, letting us know. One final piece that I wanted to mention before we wrap today's show is kind of completing that life cycle, which is looking at recovery. So we've talked a bit about how do you prepare with your architecture? How do you think about lots of different ways to detect? But that final piece, and ultimately what people look to Veeam for, is recovery, right? But making sure that you have clean recovery at the fore. So something to mention here is that we have for a while now had this feature called Secure Restore, where you can mount your backup and scan it or check it to make sure that it is not infected with malware before you mount it and push it to production, so you don't reinfect and start the life cycle all over again. We, of course, have some amazing partnerships with the likes of Sophos and Microsoft Defender. You can actually also use the Secure Restore feature with Yara, which is something we didn't cover on the last slide, but is a really great feature that you can use rule-based scanning as opposed to a proprietary third-party tool. But ultimately, the choice is yours. And that is what is so exciting. We're really passionate about as a Veeam team. We want to be the least prescriptive vendor, but the most comprehensive vendor. And that takes a lot of discipline and hard work. So make sure you shout out our R&D team and our alliances teams over on community.veeam.com, because it definitely takes a lot for us to be able to build out this amazing ecosystem of choice. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap today's show. We don't have Tech Bites this week. A bunch of our team is over in Berlin having a really amazing session with some of our vanguards and legends. But we, as an Industry Insights team, will be back next week. Jason Buffington is going to be in the host chair, joined again by Brad Linch. So be sure to tune in next week for that show. Otherwise, thank you all so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you on the next one.